With little less than a week to go until the rosters are announced, Team Canada, an abundance of options. Here's who they should bring.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. This is my 10th season doing digital hockey content, my third as a host here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network now, the #1 sports podcast network. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So on today's show, we are going to break down the roster bubble for Team Canada at the Olympics. We are going to go position group by position group. We will start up front with the forwards. We will pivot to defense in the second segment. Then in our final segment, a very familiar conversation for everydayers of Locked On Oilers. What's Canada going to do in net? So there's a lot to get to. And as the preface for this entire conversation, not just the forwards, I personally find this part of the conversation, the roster construction, the philosophy, the ideas, this is one of the more pure ideology tests we have in hockey because there's no salary cap. The only restrictions you have are picking players born in your country. And generally, we have to make concessions when we're assembling our NHL roster. We have to pick and choose what skill sets and what values we want to prioritize because we have a salary cap restriction. And in keeping conscious of the salary cap, we need to try and find ways to facilitate certain types of hockey, even though it's tricky cost-wise. And in the context of Hockey Canada, they have a litany of options at all three position groups. And who they choose to bring, I think, will tell you an awful lot about what Doug Armstrong prioritizes. So to start out, we do have 5 forwards already announced. Connor Bedard, Sidney Crosby, Nathan MacKinnon, Sam Reinhart, Braden Point. Those 5 guys were selected in the first 6, Cale Makar as well, but we're not talking defense yet. Not a moment of hesitation or conversation needed to be had. Those are clearly the 5 best Canadian forwards in the league right now. The season that McDavid is having now, in comparison to what McKinnon is doing, they are both 1 and 2 in the league in points right now. Sidney Crosby, still as great as ever. Sam Reinhart has not been as consistent as he's been the last couple of years with Florida, dealing with the season from hell the first couple months. Perfectly fine. Braden Point is injured right now as of the time of this recording, but is expected to be an important contributor for this team. Remember, Jon Cooper, the Lightning coach, is going to be the coach of Hockey Canada at this Olympics. So I do think you will see a very notable Lightning flavor to some of these selections. Now, after locks, the 5 guys who were already announced, we have what I wrote down as likely picks, and this is where you're going to hear a contingent of familiar names. Brandon Hagel, a Lightning player, someone who played a very specific role at the Four Nations for Canada, someone I think Jon Cooper trusts implicitly. Mitch Marner, someone who over the last couple of years has carved out a reputation as one of the best two-way players in the NHL, though his form for Vegas so far to start the season has not been great. Vegas has dealt with a variety of injuries. They are a bit more of a defense-first team, so I think it's reasonable to have expected Marner's counting stat production to have taken a bit of a dive, but I do think Marner, based on his track record in Hockey Canada competitions and just his reputation, will get him onto this team. I have Anthony Cirelli here as well. Everything I said about Brandon Hagel, you could reiterate, and you can add the fact he won the 2 Stanley Cups with the Lightning with Jon Cooper all those years ago now. I can't even say a couple. That was like 4 and 5 years ago. That's a while ago in hockey terms. Then I have Brad Marchand in this category as well, someone who long decorated track record of representing Canada at the Olympics, somebody whose reputation matters, someone whose leadership style I think matters, and someone I think has a really good shot to make this team. And then the next player I have here, I have him in the likely tier, but I think you can make an argument he's probably on the bubble, is Macklin Celebrini. And we'll fold Celebrini into the conversation with the rest of the guys I have written down. So beyond Celebrini, I have Tom Wilson, Sam Bennett, Seth Jarvis, Connor Bedard, Nick Suzuki, Wyatt Johnston, Mark Scheifele, Travis Konechny. So at Four Nations, Sam Bennett was there, Seth Jarvis was there, and Travis Konechny was there. All of those guys play a very certain style of hockey. Tom Wilson is someone who has had a really good first few months of the season for the Capitals and is worthy of a conversation. And what I had said at the outset, the preamble, the types of players you bring when you have no restrictions other than your imagination, I think if you bring a Tom Wilson, if you bring a Sam Bennett over, say, a Macklin Celebrini, a Connor Bedard, a Wyatt Johnston, even a Mark Scheifele, I think that's Doug Armstrong in Hockey Canada telling you, we think this type of tournament is going to be played this way. And even if America brings a more talented forward group, which I could make an argument that the United States could bring a more talented overall group. Obviously, Canada at the top, McDavid and McKinnon are 1 and 2 in the league right now as the best players in the world. But if you go blow by blow, player by player, you can make an argument that by the time you get to the 12th best forward for both countries, it's pretty even in regards to if you wanted to argue a Tage Thompson versus a Mark Scheifele, if you wanted to argue, say, a Cole Caulfield and a Wyatt Johnston. I know Johnston is a better overall player, but Caulfield's counting stat production has been very impressive, to say the least. Johnston, of course, has been a pretty good playoff performer in a way that Caulfield just doesn't have the track record. But if I had to game it out right now, I have the lines as follows. I have Crosby, McDavid, Reinhart as the first line, Crosby on the wing. I have Marner, McKinnon, Point as the second line. I have Celebrini, Suzuki, Wyatt Johnston as the third line. The fourth line, I have Brandon Hagel, Anthony Cirelli, Sam Bennett, Tom Wilson as one of the extras, and then Nick Suzuki, and Mark Scheifele as the other extra. So you have some wing flexibility there. But I do think teams generally are going to opt on the side of positional versatility. And of course, Canada's got a bunch of guys who can be kicked inside and can play on the wing. So that versatility will come in handy at some point. But I think if Doug Armstrong wants to, Canada can really send a message to the rest of the world and say, we might have a tradition, we might have a certain expectation of how this is going to go. But if we can bring a Nick Suzuki, a Wyatt Johnston, a Macklin Celebrini, a Connor Bedard even, and I know Bedard prior to his injury, I would have put him probably in the likely where I want him on the team because I think he has played so well. I think he is basically the only thing between the Chicago Blackhawks and oblivion. And I think Celebrini has the capacity to be an impactful player in this tournament, somebody who plays with a really high motor, the type of skill set that Hockey Canada says they want, but does it come in the right package? And that's really the conversation for me when it comes to the forward group. The defense is a little more straightforward because those archetypes are a bit more obvious. But when it comes to the forwards, if you want to go as skill heavy as you can bring a really talented group to this tournament and then have Hagel, Cirelli, Bennett, or Tom Wilson as your put the game away, defense first, fourth line, and I think that's fine. If we're bringing Hagel, Cirelli, Bennett, Tom Wilson, if we're bringing that many of these grit guys, I think you're missing the boat to some degree. And of course, there is no right way to build this team, but for the purposes of this exercise and this conversation, if you can put together the purest, most offense-first team, I really want to see what that would look like. I don't necessarily care about, third and fourth lines aren't skill lines. Yeah, in the NHL, there's a salary cap. You can't afford to have 4 skill lines in the National. Here at the Olympics, you absolutely can afford to because there's no salary cap, and you really should consider it because of what you could potentially unlock. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, I'm going to tell you why, yes, Evan Bouchard deserves to be on the Canadian Olympic team and why. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, and suddenly Everything's different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to change. Receivers get hot, defenses tighten up, or momentum swinging turnovers. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment with live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly, player props that update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scorer, drive results, game totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, and every possibility. Had the triple header of football on Thursday. Texans at the Chargers. The Texans 1.5-point road favorites. That's pretty enticing. And then really good game on Saturday night. The Ravens going to Green Bay in a game Baltimore needs to stay alive in the playoff race. The Ravens are 3.5-point underdogs. If you want to be right in the middle of the action, visit FanDuel.com and place live NFL bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. Thank you so much to everybody who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. And thank you so much for helping make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. And if you haven't already, go check out the brand new Everydayer Club. Details are down in the show notes, where you can get access to ad-free episodes of Locked On Oilers compatible with whatever podcasting app you use, and an invite to members-only Locked On Discord server, where other Everydayers hang out and talk sports all day long. So, in continuing our conversation, #1, I hope everybody who celebrates had a nice Christmas yesterday. I think the holidays are an important time of year, and ultimately they are what you make of them. And it's weird now celebrating Christmas as an adult. It doesn't have that same magical feeling that it did as a kid, where it felt like the day was 45 hours long. It felt like you saw every family member to ever exist going back to the Civil War. It feels like now as an adult, so much of what Christmas is about is what you make of it and how you choose to celebrate with the people you care about. And I do think it's an important message this time of year as we look towards the new year next week and setting the tone for what 2026 is going to be about. So, as we pivot to talking about the defense for Team Canada, #1, we know Cale Makar is a lock, so that's one of the 8 spots taken away for sure. Beyond that, I think you can make an argument for as many as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You can make the argument for many as 12 guys for 7 other spots. And that's a reasonable trade-off, but I think almost certainly Devon Toews will be on this team. That's a player I feel very strongly about. I feel very comfortable with. I think you want that connection he has with Cale Makar, the way they can play together or apart from each other. I think that's a valuable resource. I think Toews has shown you the capacity to play on his offside as a left-handed player as well. I think that has some value. But make no mistake, this team is largely going to be oriented around Cale Makar's capacity to break the puck out of the defensive zone, to use his foot speed to change from defense to offense quickly, because this is the type of tournament where raw foot speed is going to be the most valuable trait possible, because we're playing under international hockey rules where the forechecks won't be able to be as physical. The officiating will be a little more stringent, a little more tight. And I think your capacity as a defenseman in this tournament is largely going to be defined by your ability to break out, to go from defense to offense quickly, to augment offensive play, whether that's in transition or in the offensive zone itself. So I think Makar and Toews, absolute locks for 2 of the 8 spots. Beyond that, in the probably tier, I have 2 guys. I have Josh Morrissey and Shea Theodore. I know Josh Morrissey's having a bit of a tough go of it right now, as the Jets are as a whole right now, but I don't want to have team results dictate too much of how I feel about these guys on an individual basis. Josh Morrissey is someone I've adamantly pounded the table as a top 10 defenseman in the world, not just a top 10 Canadian defenseman, someone who has the capacity to drive a power play, who can be the #1 defenseman on a good team. He did it last year. He was the #1 defenseman on a President's Trophy winning team. I don't think you can take that for granted. And then in augmentation of Josh Morrissey, I have Shea Theodore, someone who's played a lot of playoff games for Vegas, someone who has been able to represent Canada, went to the Four Nations this past year. Someone I think his combination of mobility and puck skills translates very nicely to what we're going to be looking for in this tournament. And I think the playoff experience of Makar, Taves, Morrissey, Shea Theodore, I think those are invaluable. Because real quick, if you want to go take an aside, yesterday on the Thursday, the Christmas Day edition of Locked On NHL, Hunter Hodes and I talked about who we would bring for the United States. And when it comes to the defense for the United States, Quinn Hughes, not a lot of playoff experience. Adam Fox, 3 playoff appearances, serious ones. We're not counting the bubble. Zach Werenski has only been to the playoffs, the real playoffs, one time. Charlie McAvoy, somebody, a decent amount of playoff experience for the Bruins. Brock Faber, a little bit of experience for Minnesota. Jacob Slavin, the most tenured playoff game defenseman for Team USA. Jake Sanderson has only been to the playoffs once. Lane Hudson has only been to the playoffs once. Noah Hannafin has been to the playoffs a lot, both as a member of the Hurricanes and now subsequently as a member of the Vegas Golden Knights. He went as a Flame one time as well. But I think that's an area where Team Canada is going to look to their historical advantages, their playoff experience, their championship experience. And that is one of the areas where, even if you wanted to argue the United States is pretty even talent-wise, especially when you go forwards to forwards, defense to defense, goalie to goalies, there's a lot more playoff experience and good playoff experience on this Canadian roster than there is for the United States. I think when you look at Team USA up front, Matthew Tkachuk's won a couple cups, obviously. Jack Eichel's won a cup. But beyond that, Austin Matthews hasn't, Jack Hughes hasn't, Matt Boldy hasn't. Jake Gensel has won a few with Tampa, has won a few with Pittsburgh, and has been a decorated player for the United States. Dylan Larkin has only been to the playoffs once. Tage Thompson has never been to the playoffs. Caulfield has been to a Stanley Cup final once. Kyle Connor has been to a conference final one time, I believe. Brock Nelson's been to a couple conference finals. JT Miller's never been to a conference final. Trocheck's been to one conference final. So I think when you have the capacity to bring experience the way Canada does. And we still have to talk through the bubble. So of the final 2 spots for the active roster and then the 2 additional guys, Drew Doughty, Evan Bouchard, who I think should be on this team, Matthew Schaefer, who arguably is a Norris candidate as a rookie, which is crazy, Jacob Chikrin, Vince Dunn, Noah Dobson, Colton Parayko, Thomas Harley, Travis Sanheim. Travis Sanheim went to the Four Nations. Drew Doughty went to the Four Nations. Thomas Harley and Colton Parayko all went to the Four Nations face-off this past year. I thought Thomas Harley was probably the best or second best defenseman for Canada at the Four Nations. But real quick, the stat I have for you for Evan Bouchard. So far this year, the Oilers have been outscored 86-77 at 5-on-5. In Bouchard's minutes, they have outscored opponents 35-31. Without Bouchard on the ice, the Oilers have been outscored 55-42. I think anybody who classifies Bouchard as purely as an offense-first defenseman does not understand the value of his transition work and what that does for your team offensively. I think Evan Bouchard should be on this team as the 3rd pair right-handed defenseman. If I were handicapping this and laying this out today, this is who I would bring and who they'd be playing with. I'm bringing Makar and Taves. That's my 1st pair. I'm bringing Shea Theodore, and I'm bringing Matthew Schaefer as my 2nd pair, and then I'm bringing Josh Morrissey and Evan Bouchard as my 3rd pair. My additions, I'm bringing Sanheim and I am bringing Thomas Harley. Those are my reserve defensemen. And I want to prioritize puck movement as much as possible. It's an area where Canada has the capacity to take advantage of some of the United States' weaknesses. When you look at the Tkachuk brothers, not particularly fast skaters, Austin Matthews, not a particularly fast skater, you can take advantage of a slower team by being a dominant transition group. And Canada can assemble as good a puck-moving 1 through 6 as possible. And it's incumbent upon them to not get too caught up in the blocking shots and the defense first guys like a Parayko, like a Sanheim, even like a Doughty, who at this point I don't think is one of the best 8 Canadian defensemen. But based on legacy, based on track record, Doughty very well may end up wearing the leaf on his chest one last time in international competition. We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, I am going to dive into the Team Canada goalie situation, who I would start, who I would bring, and why, right after this. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are breaking down who I would bring to represent Canada at the Olympics in Milan. And candidly, I'm going to be rooting for the United States at the Olympics. I think I have a better chance of Team Canada bringing the best possible team than I do the United States. And I think this is a good exercise because I think this gives you a really good purview into how I think about hockey versus how some of the other decision makers do. And when it comes to goalie, this is the great question surrounding Team Canada. This position has changed radically in the last 5 to 10 years, where Canada has historically always had one of the 5 best goalies in the world. The Marty Brodeur run was 20 plus years, debuting as a rookie, as a teenager in the early 90s, all the way through the 2010 Winter Olympics. And then Carey Price took the mantle from there. And there hasn't been the next guy to seize those reins. There just isn't a Canadian goalie of that profile. There are a number of interesting, or shall I say tantalizing, Canadian goalies who have the capacity to be pretty good NHL starters, but nobody who really profiles as a Vezina caliber goalie. And I think there are a variety of factors that have compounded this. I think The Athletic did a story about this last year during the regular season, asking the question, where are the Canadian goalies? And it's a few things. Number one, you only get to play as a goalie half of the games if you're on a team with 2-3 goalies, and you have to share that time. It is better off. You have a better chance as a young player of getting ice time and then subsequently visual optimization of getting seen as a young player to move up the ladder by playing regularly. And if you're a goalie and you split the workload even slightly, even if it's, 60-40, 70-30, if you're only getting 30% of the starts, you might be better off trying to be a forward or a defenseman and getting to play, as opposed to looking for those opportunities where you are just the backup, so you're not getting as much of a workload. Number two, it's the most expensive position. You need specialized coaching. You need specialized equipment, in addition to your normal hockey obligations of just paying for your team and the baseline equipment. So there are a variety of factors that are compounding this issue. And I do think to some degree, Hockey Canada tries to stack the deck for guys occasionally, and I think you can make an argument that Team Canada was ready to stack the deck for Carter Hart to be the next Canadian goalie in this lineage. And because of his off-the-ice stuff, because of his suspension, because of the fact he also just isn't that good, he hasn't taken that mantle. And there are a number of guys who are in this conversation who there's maybe could step up. I know last year we were having this conversation. Samuel Montembaugh, Stuart Skinner, very funny enough, were in that conversation as guys that we were going to keep our eye on. We were going to see what happened last year, and maybe that could alter their trajectory. But right now, I do think the incumbent is still Jordan Binnington. Doug Armstrong, the general manager of this program, that's his goalie from the St. Louis Blues. I think Binnington this year has been one of the worst goalies in the league. .870 save percentage, 3.44 goals against average, 7-9-6 record. And you heard me leading up to the Oilers trade for Tristan Jarry. I had no interest in Jordan Binnington. He's expensive, he's older, and he just hasn't played very good hockey consistently, especially in the regular season, for a while now. Now, in fairness to Jordan Binnington, this is a guy who does have a pretty good track record in big games. He did win a Game 7 on the road in the Stanley Cup Final. I do think Binnington's playoff run 2019 is a little overrated. The numbers are nothing special. They're not bad by any stretch, but they're not stealing games, incredible stuff. 16-10, 914 save, 2.46 goals against. And that's on a team, the Blues, who were a great defensive team. Parayko, Pietrangelo, a really well-rounded defense first group. Joel Edmondson, of course, that made his workload a little bit easier. At the Four Nations, Binnington made 4 starts. He had a 907 save, a 2.38 goals against. But again, on a good team, he doesn't have to do a lot. I do think the 2 other goalies that should be brought to Italy, I think Logan Thompson of the Washington Capitals, who in 2 years as a Washington Capital has put together some remarkable numbers. 913 save, 2.39 goals against, and he saved 53 goals saved above expected over the last 2 years as a Capital. I think those numbers are really impressive. And the caveat there, of course, is it's a small sample size. Logan Thompson really only has 3-ish seasons as a starting goalie in the NHL, and not a bell cow starter, not a 50, 55 start guy, like a 40, 45 tandem goalie start workload. And I think there might be a bit of reservation about starting him in a best-on-best tournament because of the fact that he just doesn't have a long track record as a starter. Now, other candidates, Darcy Kuemper, somebody who has been on the periphery of very good for a long time, someone who, when we did a goalie exercise over the summer and ultimately ranked him, has really put together a solid NHL career, somebody who I can make an argument for maybe as high as the 8th or 9th best goalie in the world over the last handful of seasons. He does have a Stanley Cup to his name back in Colorado in 2022. Of course, he signed a long extension with Washington. Didn't work out after 1 year. They traded him to the Kings for the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, which has worked out reasonably well for both. This year, Darcy Kuemper, 10-6-6, 917 save percentage, 2.19 goals against average. Great numbers. The Kings are a defense-first team. They don't ask a lot of their goalies, but when you put a pretty good goalie in an environment like that, it really allows his numbers to pop. Kuemper got Vezina votes last year. This is someone I think has the capacity to start games for Canada and not really sticking out like a sore thumb. And then the last guy I have written down, I wouldn't bring this guy because I just don't trust him because he has not a big track record. That's Scott Wedgwood, who is 16-1-4 this year for the Avalanche. He has a 924 save percentage and a 2.01 goals against average. These are incredible numbers on a great team. Scott Wedgwood has never really been a starter at the NHL level. I think if I had to start these guys in order, I would start Logan Thompson with Darcy Kuemper as the backup. And Jordan Binnington at that point is your wild card. He is the hope that if it gets to that point, he can recapture some of the magic. He can stir the echoes. But I think based on how this season has gone so far, Logan Thompson has been the best of these three guys. I think Darcy Kuemper has shown you over the last 5 years his range of outcomes, his potential, his high end, his low end. And then I think you do bring Binnington just as your security blanket, as your vibes guy, in hopes that he, if called upon, can capture some of the magic. I don't think Jordan Binnington has played well enough to be on this team, but I don't think skill alone gets you on this team. I do think there are vibes. I do think there are intangibles. And I do think, for lack of a better word, sometimes guys in the decision-making roles like a Doug Armstrong, like a John Cooper, they have their guys for a reason. And I think I'll be curious to see how this roster ends up getting shaken out. I do think Canada has the capacity to bring a very talented team. I think if they bring the right mix of guys, they can bring the most talented team. But that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everybody that made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. For your second listen, be sure to check out Locked On NHL Game Night, where the guys are breaking down every game every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned in June. Be sure to check out the Everydayer Club for access to ad-free episodes of Locked On Oilers on all your major podcasting platforms, access to that Everydayer Discord server, and so much more. Everyone have a safe and fun weekend. I will talk to you guys on Monday. Until then, let's go Oilers.